Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this webinar on post-pandemic impacts on food and beverage businesses and how to ensure resiliency. Now, in today's webinar, we're going to discuss some of the key factors involved in building a more resilient post-pandemic food and beverage supply chain in 2021 and beyond. There's no question that 2020 has been an unprecedented year. The pandemic has changed the way we work, the way we shop, the way we live. And while some of those changes fade with the coming of the vaccine for COVID-19, many are here to stay. This is what we like to refer to as the new normal. Now, as we know, consumers have shifted a huge part of their buying activity to online to avoid crowds and lower infection risks. E-commerce grocery is now expected to account for at least 21.5% of US grocery sales by 2025. That's up from a pre-COVID prediction of 13.5%. Meanwhile, producers have suffered plant shutdowns and struggled to implement appropriate social distancing and hygiene measures that will allow them to operate safely. This disparity between producer and consumer has turned the supply chain as we know it on its head. In response, supply chain leaders have been rapidly implementing changes to boost resiliency and responsiveness to future disruptions. Now, while we're starting to hear the term post-pandemic used more frequently, the truth is that COVID-19 will continue to cause disruptions and policy shifts in manufacturing and distribution for some time to come. This new normal is a world where everything is in flux. Supply chain leaders must begin to implement changes now to ensure they're prepared for whatever comes next. So, I'm excited to be here today with three experts, all of whom have been on the front lines of the pandemic, developing new ways to navigate supply chain issues in these troubling times. First, we're pleased to have Philippe Gautrin with us today. Philippe is the CEO of Generix Group, a software developer that has engineered a comprehensive suite of supply chain optimization solutions. Philippe has been the general manager of Generix Group North America since 2019. Prior to that, he accumulated almost 30 years of supply chain and logistics experience, overseeing hundreds of projects in the US, Canada, and Europe. Next, we have Doug Mefford, who is product marketing director at Generix Group. Doug has more than 25 years of experience in the supply chain industry, from inventory control to operational leadership within an omni-channel distribution operation. Prior to Generix, Doug was the operations manager for the Dallas Cowboys, overseeing their warehouse operations, retail distribution, silk screen manufacturing, and direct-to-consumer order fulfillment. And finally, we have John Fleming, who is Director of Information Technology for Chapman's Ice Cream. John has worked around the world in various industries and roles, gaining over 30 years of IT experience. So now let's watch a short video highlighting Chapman's Ice Cream.
Welcome to Markdale, Ontario, home to Chapman's Ice Cream, Canada's largest independent ice cream manufacturer. In 2009, this entire operation burnt to the ground, but they rose from the ashes like a phoenix, like a delicious, creamy butterscotch phoenix. This week, I visit with one of those rare family businesses actually run by a family. And this is Ashley Chapman, and he is Vice President of Chapman's Ice Cream. Hello, Ashley. How are you?
Wonderful.
Nice to see you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Let's talk about the family business for a minute. How did it start?
Started with my mom and dad in 1973, and they moved up from Toronto and bought an old beat-down creamery and cleaned it up and started making ice cream.
And now it's a family business, like you're the vice president?
Yep.
And they're like what, the president and CEO or something like that?
Exactly.
How big is ice cream in Canada?
Huge. Canadians love ice cream.
Do they? And we're talking about the whole thing, right? The ice cream treats and the bars and the lollies and all that business.
Everything you can think of.
So how much money do we spend on ice cream every year?
Not enough.
No.
So this is just a plain mix that we're starting to blend. Now we're gonna add the cocoa to make it into a chocolate mix.
And this will be chocolate ice cream.
And delicious.
Delicious chocolate ice cream.
Okay, so our webinar today is going to follow this format. First, we'll discuss embracing change and building resiliency, moving then to impacts of changing demand. Then we'll cover preparing for the unexpected and finish up with steps and best practices for the future. We also want to leave time for questions and answers from the audience, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So first, let's discuss the primary strategies being implemented to improve adaptability and flexibility in the supply chain. Much of the recovery discussion has to do with building a more resilient supply chain. So question, why was the supply chain so vulnerable to a disruption like the COVID-19 pandemic? And what are supply chain and logistics professionals doing to address the resiliency problem? Doug Mefford, want to take that?
Sure. Thanks, Bob. Thank you, everybody, for attending this afternoon. Look forward to the discussion we're going to have in the next 30, 45 minutes. So when you think about, vulnerability in the supply chain, in so many ways, a lack of adaptability can really be negatively impactful as it relates to responding to change and diminishing some of the resiliency factors necessary. So, the adaptability of a facility to meet the needs of changing demand become critical, whether that's changing in, picking processes in order to address variable demands, et cetera. The other thing that really has been a key word in the industry is so much lean process and lean inventory and lean initiatives to minimize on-hand inventory and kind of go just in time. If we have a fixed network of suppliers in just-in-time criteria, and all of the suppliers start to move towards the need to satisfy differing demand or an increase in demand in certain areas, while maybe having a decrease in demand in other areas, the lack of flexibility in the network, the lack of flexibility within the operational process flows can really change or negate the ability to adapt. And so adaptability is really a critical element to diminish the singularity of supply. The other element that made or created some risk was a large human dependency. With the impacts of COVID-19 on the population as a whole, the need for social distancing, the differing in ability for labor to come to facilities and facility shutdowns and so on, really put us in a position where human dependency was exposed, whether that's in the transportation process, whether that be in the ports of call or within the four-wall facilities. If the facility workers can't come to work due to, quarantine requirements and things of that nature, it can create a lack of flexibility. So the thought is to move towards, and we've seen an aggressive increase in the move towards automation, whether it be, AGVs or robotic solutions that will augment the human dependency and reduce some of that lack of flexibility in the facilities across the board. And then, as we talk about the supply chain as a whole, kind of single sourcing of raw materials or component inventory or finished goods for trans distribution has, with ports being closed and international freight impacts as a result of COVID, really that singular source creates a negative impact from a resiliency perspective. So the thought has been, and many conversations have been had and lots of actions have been taken in regards to diversifying the actual supplier network and creating a blended supply network versus a singular to allow adaptations to quickly be implemented and maintain the level of inventory necessary to satisfy the changing demand. John, I'm sure you've got some experience here. I'd welcome any thoughts you have in regards to this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Doug. So the Chapman's team took a very, very proactive approach to dealing with the challenges of COVID-19. And front of mind was the safety and well-being of our employees, because let's face it, without our human capital and our workers, we just simply cannot function. We can't make ice cream. So ahead of any federally mandated requirements, we actually took a voluntary decision to shut down the manufacturing facilities. The purpose of this shutdown was to allow us to prepare the plant for what we call the new normal and the socially distanced working environment that was now required. Additionally, we had to secure a steady and reliable supply of PPE equipment that even back in February last year, we knew we would be needing for the long term. This short-term shutdown, which lasted about 10 days, allowed our employees to return to the production facility very quickly, confident that they were in a safe and well-prepared environment. Now, obviously, we had to develop some enhanced safety protocols, and communication of these was key. We made sure that by letter, by email, by signage throughout the plant, and through meetings and pep talks, we communicated what we were doing to the employees. Part of our changes included developing a customized temperature checking application and an employee tracking application that tied in with the automated key fob system that we use. That way, if we did have any concerns about an employee's symptoms or health or well-being, we were able to see when they came in, what their temperature readings were, and where they moved throughout the facility. We also recognized the potential financial impact that this pandemic would have on our employees. And so ahead of the Canadian CERB benefit, we implemented what we call pandemic pay. And we offered employees interest-free loans for the duration of the pandemic to try and ease some of that stress. Now, when the government actually finished the pandemic pay in Canada, Chapman's made the decision to implement that permanently at our own expense for all employees in the production facility. At the very beginning of the pandemic, back in March last year, February, March time, we saw a significant increase in orders, around 20% increase in the volume of orders as suppliers were trying to come to terms with the changes of supply in the marketplace in the absence of federal and provincial guidance. Nobody knew how long this was going to last. So we had to approach that and deal with it as proactively as we could. We decided that we would respond by accelerating our purchases of floor stock and raw materials to try and build in some sensible buffers into our production process. Where we saw that suppliers were experiencing challenges of their own, we worked with them wherever possible so that we could secure the raw materials. And where we found that we were exposed in terms of single source of supply, we reached out and we fostered new relationships with suppliers wherever possible. That allowed us to bridge any short-term gap in our raw material and floor stock. We secured some additional dry storage warehouse space, and we used our warehouse management system, SoloChain, to manage these new remote facilities and the additional inventory that was now being stored at those locations. And SoloChain was really crucial to us here because it gave us real-time, minute-by-minute insights into our inventory and raw material availability as well as demand. And that in turn allowed us to manage our customers' expectations and plan our production processes far better. Finally, in an effort to be fair and equitable to all of our customers, we decided that at the outset of the pandemic, we would implement an inventory sharing scheme so that no one customer could entirely dominate the availability of Chapman's products that are out there.
Wow, that is so interesting, so creative, and so proactive. Thank you so much for that, John. Okay, so another question and point to make here. Retailers are finding that they can't survive without omnichannel, while manufacturers are implementing direct-to-consumer sales to create new revenue strategies. Now, I'm going to throw this one out to the whole panel. What impacts will this have on the way we handle distribution and fulfillment? Doug, maybe you start.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. It really is interesting with the change in demand and the change in order profile, how customers need to adapt, or providers need to adapt and adjust their operational processes. We've seen a significant change in the blend of demand, and that requires different picking allocation strategies, inventory allocation strategies, and fulfillment workflows. John mentioned that they changed to an inventory sharing process. It's important to have the systems that allow you to create the allocation strategies to ensure that you do not allow a particular customer to dominate the market or corner the supply. So, having solutions, systemic solutions that allow the configurability to adapt to new strategies is critically important. Do you think about manufacturing direct, whether that be in the food industry and that large increase in direct to consumer sales that has been initiated or accelerated by the COVID pandemic and will likely stay around, is the need to have differing order profiles being fulfilled within maybe the same facility versus having a dedicated facility. So again, the flexibility of a solution that allows you to handle maybe retail store replenishment type orders in a route-based fulfillment structure, as well as adding and consolidating maybe buy online, pick up in store orders so that customers can avoid contact and so on, which is so prevalent right now as we move through the second and third and potential fourth wave of outbreak, if you will, with the pandemic. Excuse me. So, we need to have the solutions in place that allow consolidation of that demand while maximizing the efficiency of movement of materials through a facility to ensure that that can be delivered to the store or directly to the consumer without having a major impact. And so the systems, whether they be, solely a WMS solution like Solo Chain, or integrated with augmented vehicles and augmented realities, whatever, those solutions from a technical perspective have to allow that adaptation through configuration and facilitate the blended demand fulfillment and satisfaction of the customer SLAs. Phil, anything to add on that subject?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And we had seen it coming for a number of years already, where manufacturers were for sometime a bit fed up by retailers that were imposing pretty large fees to buy or to rent linear feet in the stores, and they were already starting to look into how they could go direct to the consumer, and to do so they had to change some of their processes. So we were already seeing, which accelerated drastically, manufacturers looking into how they could do direct to customer or consumer distribution, how they could move to full pallet shipments to unit picking or case picking. And obviously that required some drastic change in their processes and in their systems. All this said, this brings a question, or should bring a question, to a few players in the supply chain, namely the wholesalers, where we believe these individuals that used to play a key role in the supply chain can be potentially at risk, where the consumers' habits have changed. The retailers are now shipping orders differently. The manufacturers are also doing the same. And there's a risk that middleman may disappear, or may have to reinvent itself to bring added value in the process. And as retailers want to keep selling and want to keep reaching the consumer, and then as we were confined in our home, or in an hotel, in a confinement process, or at the cottage, whomever can do that, or remote locations, our buying process and our buying patterns changed drastically, and the retailers had to adapt to that. So we did see quite a bit of changes. I'm sure, John, you did see it in your demand patterns as well.
Absolutely. And for me, I think, Doug, you mentioned the terms flexibility, adaptation, agility. All of those are things that, as a technologist and as an organization, we had to respond to. We had to be able to meet this challenge head on without there being an impact on our customers. Now, the Chapman's distribution model is a combination of direct store deliveries which consist of unit picking, bundle picking, and some larger to warehouse shipments that are predominantly pallet based. And all of our systems were configured initially to accommodate what we saw as the normal pattern of operation. The ability for us to be able to say, okay, the norm is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. We suddenly have customers saying, I want 20% more than you gave me yesterday, and expect that in the blink of an eye, was, for me, challenging to overcome. But what we chose to do at the outset, when we were building our systems, we considered that need to rapidly scale up or scale down depending on fluctuating demand from the consumers. So when we mentioned in the previous segment there that Chapman significantly increased its floor stock, significantly increased its purchasing of raw materials. We brought online new storage warehouses, which I think for any organization and for any IT department is a challenge at the best of times. What made it easier for us was having the systems in place that allowed us to implement these new procedures, the new policies, add additional control points into our processes without the need for significant re-engineering or significant time spans. We were able to turn on a dime, and we were able to deliver and meet the customer's expectations for demand by leveraging what we already had as soon as the pandemic started to take hold.
Okay, thank you so much for that, John. It seems like one of the key answers we're talking about here is through technology implementation and change management processes, both of them hand in hand, of course, which leads us right into our next topic. Preparedness has been essential for every manufacturer, retail, logistics operators, or really any business hoping to ride out additional waves of COVID-19, as well as natural disasters, global trade instability, political turmoil, and other major disruptions. Now, again, I'm going to throw this out to the whole panel. What can leaders in the manufacturing and supply chain sectors do to become proactive instead of reactive? What do you think, John?
I'll take that one, Bob, to begin with. Obviously, as you know, I'm from a technical background. So my advice to anybody is to consider the technologies that you currently have and consider the technologies that are available that will allow you to incorporate resilience into your operations from the outset. And then plan. Develop a business continuity plan. Because for me, COVID-19 is a business continuity event. Plan, and then when you think you're done, go plan some more, because if you are entirely reactive or predominantly reactive, you're already way behind in the game. Now, it's not possible to foresee every potential disruption that we may face, but we know that they are going to happen. So take some time to do some what-if scenario planning. And this is something I think everybody should engage in. It's virtually no cost to minimal cost. And I think, particularly leaders, I'm speaking with technology leaders as well, they have an obligation to do this. Consider the unknown. Think about what may happen, how you can respond to it. And one of the things I did recently was implemented a risk management team so that we can actively go and look for risks. Now, it requires a certain degree of maturity in an organization to be able to look at existing processes and policies and say, there's a huge gap here. But if you can rise above that, then that can be a very, very useful procedure. Developing actions on playbooks and procedures is also very, very useful, because when you're in the midst of an event, whether it's COVID-19, a weather event, a political event, or whatever, that's the worst time to try and figure out what you should be doing. You really want to make these decisions and consider your actions in times of calm when if things are not under so much stress, and that will allow you to plan effectively and respond more effectively to the unknown. From a systems perspective, try and make sure that your software solutions have the capacity and the agility to respond to the unknown. If you're unsure if they do, reach out to your warehouse management experts, ask them. Think about the scenarios that may occur and just make sure that you're prepared for it. If you're thinking about system installs, system upgrades, process changes, or just continuing development, that's the time for me to be thinking about business continuity and your actions should an event like COVID-19 happen. Phil, I'm sure you can expand on this.
Yeah, you're right, John, on this one. And I'm sure, I think it was 20 years ago when we started talking about DRPs and risk management, and it was trendy for a while, just like many things can be. And then it kind of went away, and people thought they had their risk management plan and everything. If anything, I don't think too many companies thought that something like COVID was ever going to happen. They thought about the fire, the bridge that would collapse on the highway. They thought about the electricity issues or whatever. But having such a crisis for such a long time was indeed something that I think most of us, let's admit it, did not see coming, nor at least plan for it. And truly, it brought some weaknesses in many companies. People realize the importance of their suppliers, like we said before, of their distribution network, and also of their people. They had some people in very key and very sensitive positions. John, you're one of them in IT, obviously. A department that we tend to forget when everything goes well, but when things such like COVID and working from home happen, and suddenly you're at the middle of the crisis for sure. And people realize that it was a pretty sensible or weak department, and we believe that it's going to bring significant changes to how people structure these departments, and also how people are buying solutions. Whereas previously people used to say, we want to have our servers in-house, we want to have our IT crew looking at this, and one or two people can be pretty good in a normal business day, but when one of them is sick and the other one also becomes sick, then you're suddenly at a high risk. And therefore, we think that SaaS solutions will even more be likely to be trendy and purchased by our customers going forward. What we've also seen is because of the again, people falling sick, they suddenly had to in the essential companies find new resources or hire new people and quickly onboard these people to be efficient. And how do you do that? It's when you're making sure that you've got sound processes and pretty much self-intuitive processes where people can within minutes or hours be productive. And that again will change how people are optimizing their processes, implementing technology, and making sure that they can easily flip their operations or expand or decrease, as you said, or onboard new people. The third one I would say is automation. That was something that a few years ago we used to talk about. I would say pretty heavy mechanization in warehouses, with some conveyors and some other devices, which tend to be pretty, can bring you a lot of throughput, but on the other hand, they're pretty fixed into the floor. And whenever you need to expand or decrease or move into a new site or a third-party site, like you said, John, then you're stuck with your equipment. And therefore, we believe that cobots or picking devices or picking aid systems are going to be, we're already pretty trendy. We could see them in supply chain shows on the floors of these exhibitors. Will be quickly expanding into warehouses because they can be easily picked up, put in the truck, and then they can be then unloaded into a new site, and you're up and running within hours. So this is, again, flexibility is going to be a key word. It was already one. Agility, we believe, will be key drivers to selecting technologies and also reviewing processes. Doug, anything you want to add to that?
Sure. Thanks, Phil. Thinking about, the major topic of proactive versus reactive, right? If I'm reactive, I'm late. And the idea of being proactive is, as John said, really kind of running through scenarios. So the building of a risk mitigation and proactive modeling process becomes critical. And then what are the outcomes of that? Maybe it is accelerating the adoption of cutting edge technologies like IoT devices, right? The manufacturing space, monitoring devices that can monitor motors or monitor, rotary bearing elements and understand or communicate vibrations to create a preemptive maintenance schedule to allow uptime not to be interrupted. That's proactivity, right? The ability to think in advance of what's transpiring is hard to do, but the modeling and a cross-functional team building that model, because it can't be singular and focused to just IT or just operations or just distribution or just transportation.
Mhm.
When you think about the move or the shift, the digital shift in the supply chain, there's been a lot of shift to, the order management and inventory visibility and, those types of applications to the cloud because there's a diverse group of consumers there. Recently over the last couple of years, we've seen a pretty significant shift in the WMS space. Oftentimes it's been a little bit lagging because it runs a four-wall physical facility. So how do you do that from the cloud? The shift towards SaaS really is a proactive change, right? Because you get the disaster recovery capabilities with public cloud offerings. You get the duplication or the high availability infrastructure without having to have dedicated resources. So you can focus on your business contingencies and your business diversification, as well as your internal, responsive processes that are going to be necessary. And lastly, the point on the slide is the documentation of tribal knowledge. Having been an implementation consumer of software, I was thankful that I had very significant documentation associated with my business process. So as I worked with my technology vendor, we easily identified where we needed to configure and how we needed to establish the solution to satisfy my needs. I worked very hand in hand with a transportation system when I worked in the food service supply chain as a logistics manager and really looked at how do we build the most effective, efficient, and redundant transportation network so that if in fact carrier problems arose, I could still get the transportation inbound that will allow me to satisfy my outbound needs. So the development of redundancy, the development of planning, and the shift towards digital transformation really can help facilitate all of those things with a clearly defined process definition. If you don't have the tribal knowledge of your operation or even your infrastructure, your IT, your solution, the configurations associated with it that make it run, and you just have a single source of failure internally, that's an opportunity that you will not be able to react well to if in fact that person has an illness, maybe COVID, or a tragic circumstance that arises. So the ability to have redundancy in not just solutions, not just in processes, but in the personnel through documented procedures that are constantly reviewed, constantly evolved, and adaptable to adjust to this unexpected, unforeseen circumstance that we're in. It leads us towards building the supply chains of the future, which are able to respond instead of react and continue to facilitate the ever essential need of supplying goods to the consumer. So,
Yeah, great information. Thanks so much for that. I especially like what Doug said. The one thing he said, if I'm reactive, I'm late. I think that's as good a mantra as any for corporations today. So now I want to talk about how the things we've discussed today will translate into practice moving into next year as we hopefully begin to put the pandemic in our rearview mirror. Now, if we created a list of best practices for your field today, what would you want to see on there? John?
Oh, I'd like to see many things. COVID-19 has been a lesson for us all, I think. I think there are lots of buzz phrases around this, 5Ps, 7Ps, whatever. I like it this way. Just simply planning to fail is failing to plan. And it's much, much better to have something and not need it than need it and not have it. So I think the lesson I take from COVID-19 is that you have to plan, you have to prepare. And yeah, but Doug, you talked there about the numerous things that you can do to try and get this preparedness in place, so that you build resilience into your facilities, you build it into your processes, you build it into your documentation, so that in the event of the unknown, you can pick up and you can carry on as quickly as possible. For those who are doing the work, or who have to actually sell this to their management, one of the things that I found a challenge, not at Chapman's, but speaking with colleagues, is sometimes having people to buy into the concept that all of this effort that has to go into business continuity planning or process planning is worth it. I mean, COVID-19, okay, it will pass, but there will be something else. So for those who are perhaps looking for something that you can use as a leverage to get the funds or the resources to do this, I say to people, consider your brand reputation. People, organizations, especially larger organizations, do business with other businesses that they trust. Your inability to fulfill demand, regardless of the circumstances, and in this case it was COVID-19, but it could be something else, your inability to fulfill that demand erodes that trust. And the time and effort and cost that you will spend on developing plans that would allow you to be responsive and allow you to be agile, the reputational hit that you may take and the cost of that could eclipse anything that you may spend on continuity plan. Ensure, obviously, that you have a reliable and secure supply of raw materials and critical supplies, not just the floor stock. One of the challenges that Chapman's faced, for example, was food grade cleaning materials, of all things. Suddenly, everybody in Ontario, particularly the health authorities, got first pick at anything that was food grade cleaning. So we had to look for alternative ways to fulfill that need. So alternative sources of supply, wherever possible, don't have a single source. Engagement with employees. I think every large scale organization has to have somebody who's good at that communication, because for the Chapman's organization, it was about trust. That's why it worked so well. The employees trusted the information we were giving them. We trusted them to respond appropriately and to work with everything that we had implemented for their communication. Chapman's is in a very rural location, so recruitment at the best of times is difficult, but making sure that our employees felt safe, that they were informed about the actions that we were taking, and they knew how Chapman's was addressing the COVID-19 pandemic meant that we lost virtually nobody as a result of COVID-19. You have to be flexible. People experienced childcare needs. They experienced their partner losing their position and having to stay at home. There were lots of disruptions to our normal daily life. So a degree of flexibility I think should be considered a best practice. You cannot experience something like COVID and expect everybody to continue as they normally did when we're all calling it the new normal. Clearly, something changed, and businesses have to change with that. In the context of agility, system capacity and preparedness is key. You don't know what's coming. So take a look at your systems. Make sure that they have the capacity and flexibility, not just to support your business in a normal state as it is now, or for your anticipated and projected growth, but also to deal with those events that are unforeseen and unplanned. I think as part of our business continuity planning, we already knew that we had a safe, a robust, and a scalable infrastructure. But we still had to do work to prove it and to test it. So as you develop these plans, as we said with business continuity plans and any kind of planning, a plan is great, but that old wartime adage, plans don't survive first contact with the enemy. Or as Mike Tyson would say, he has a plan until he gets in the ring and someone punches him in the face. Those kinds of things. You never know what's coming. So plan, prepare, and test.
Thanks for that. How about Doug? You have a comment on that?
Sure, Bob. Thanks. John, great points across the board on all of that. When I think about best practices, the enhanced agility is really kind of the idea of creating the playbook, both from a technological and a processorial operational respect, that you have a playbook that you can implement change management, right? And that oftentimes gets lost in the process of agility is accommodating and account for change management. The idea of technology adoption is a critical component for best practices. How can I advance my technology selections and implementations that will enable my agility and flexibility, right? The ability to have solutions that are not, point solutions or, dedicated solutions, but ones that offer variability in their feature set, in their configurability, in their implementation structures. I think about our professional services organization collaborating with clients. That's so often been an on-premise, shoulder to shoulder, sitting next to each other type of activity for the life of, technology provision. When COVID hit and travel restrictions put in play, we as an organization, Generics, had to go through the process of transforming our services organization to support our customers' technological advancement, technological adoption by changing our processes. So we had to employ agility in that process to continue to satisfy our customer needs. And part of that was adoption of new technological tools, whether it be Zoom, a very prevalent element that has come about as a result of COVID, has made a huge leap forward in the sharing and interactive engagement of people. Sustainability as it relates to, personnel. I think about pre-COVID in the U.S. in particular, I think our unemployment rate was something at 3.5%. And so there was a need to, sustain our employees. And part of that is employee engagement, communication, but also the investment in training personnel, improving the digital skill set. If there was no ability to have technological skill and the ability to access training associated with that and having a good learning initiative within an organization, the transformation to work from home for those that didn't have to physically be present could have been tremendously more difficult. Mm-hmm. But many organizations have invested in improved digital skills for their employees, particularly important in the supply chain space and warehousing, because in quite frankness, the employee community is getting a little bit older in that realm. But aside from that, if I can engage my employees and communicate with them effectively through training programs and transparency, what happens is I have the ability to have that employee loyalty and minimize the risk of people departing when trouble comes or when difficulty arises. John mentioned, and I think Chapman is an exemplary employer in regards to how they've dealt with their employees and built structures and proactively planned and reactively responded to an unprecedented time by ensuring that they, the employees, knew through the leadership engagement that they were a priority right alongside with the customers. And that becomes key to the sustainability of any business as well as sustaining the growth. So I think there's a lot of best practices that can come out as a result of the changes that have been adopted. But agility, adaptability, flexibility, and all of the processes and procedures, modeling and teamwork that goes into developing that as an organization will allow for sustainability long term, regardless of what comes down the pipe. Phil,
Thanks, Doug.
anything you'd like to add
Yeah.
there?
Go ahead, Philippe.
Yeah, I mean, interesting topics, John and Doug, and as you said, so it made me thought of a year ago, pretty much when it all started. We all went home and then started working remotely, and everybody was a bit in a panic mode. But then, and we were saying, well, it's good that the food is still on the shelf of the stores, and there's still hospitals working and everything. But then we had to realize as a company, and also make our people realize that they were part of that essential service frontline, where our customers were these companies that were, as Chapman's, manufacturing ice cream, distributing some masks, providing equipment to the hospitals, and it was a big aha moment for our people to say, okay, we're part of what's happening. We are essential workers as well, and it really brought to them a lot of pride and a lot of sense of ownership of doing something in the crisis. And second point about people, Doug, you were mentioning that we were close to being in a full employment world before the crisis, and I'm pretty sure we'll quickly go back to that state. And let's admit it, warehouses and distribution centers are not the sexiest place, or the people where people are really looking forward to work when they're growing, and there's a need for to make these places more appealing, because we may put in cobots, we may put in automation and so on, but there's still going to be a need to have humans in these warehouses, and we need to make it appealing, because supply chain has clearly proven to be an essential link in our life. And so we're currently working and thinking about how we can make the work in the warehouse more appealing and more fun. So how can you gamify the picking an order, receiving a shipment? These are all things that need to be thought about to ensure that we appeal to the young ones, and that they do indeed come and work in the warehouses. The other thing, even though John, you were mentioning, look into your supply base, look into alternatives, almost hoard on to some inventory. This is good, but I think it also brought the fact that people need to trust each other in the supply chain. And I think we'll be seeing more collaboration with the different players, where they're going to be sharing more their forecasts, their inventory demand, their issues with production, so that you don't lose the trust that you were mentioning, John, that is so hard to acquire from your customer or from the consumer. So if you've got trust, if you are reliable, then it's going to be easier to deliver your promise to your customers. And with trust, I think that it's going to be easier to do that going
Phil,
forward.
can I jump in there, just add one thing to the discussion there? Just you mentioned there just about trust. One of the things that Chapman's did was, very early on, we secured a very good supply of PPE. That was in part for our own benefit. Obviously, we have to provide this to our employees, but we were also mindful of the fact that we were we were in this problem with everybody else. Chapman's has been part of the Grey Bruce region pandemic response for 30 years. And, one of the things that we tried to do was make sure that the other organizations around us that didn't have our purchasing capability or didn't have the contacts and associations that we had could also be supplied. So while we purchased the PPE, we were actually distributing that to local organizations, to care homes, to the Grey Bruce Health Authority, just to make sure that, we could have held on to it and everything else. But like you say, I think that it's a good point. We're all in this together. And while I don't want to sound like Rob Ford, we all had our challenges, but that, where you are a family organization like the Chapmans, we have a reputation for the Chapmans family being very philanthropic and really caring about the local community. So I think, organizations, when they do have an advantage, they should look at other ways in which they can help the community that they serve, and that help make them so successful.
Thanks a lot, guys. We only have just a few minutes left, and I want to get as many questions in as possible. So let's get right to it. I'm going to just throw this out to the panel, and whoever wants to take any of these questions is welcome to chime in. What do you think is the single most useful tool for building resilience into food and beverage supply chain right now? Who wants to go?
I'm happy to jump in on that. I think one of the single most useful tools is technology, right? Technology is a generic statement, but a continuity of technology landscape across the supply chain. So when you think about not just warehouse management, but manufacturing execution, transportation, inventory management, order management, the adoption of the available supply chain technologies is probably the single most useful tool to move forward. There was a question that kind of ties into this during the webinar on the question and answers. What's the technological advancement that should be applied on supply chains moving forward that can anticipate such disruptions? The reality is there's not a crystal ball, if you will. But companies like ourselves and many in the technology provision landscape are starting to embrace and adopt artificial intelligence as a very strong tool within supply chain technologies, machine learning algorithms that are defined that will engage with existing structures, usage patterns, inventory utilization, productivity, and really start to influence the decision-making process in advance, right? So predictive analytics, the ability to encounter possible weather variations and their impact on demand patterns, and how do you adjust in your supply chain to accommodate that? Those are the things of the future that are starting to come forward today with the high intelligence around data science, the Internet of Things, provision of large volumes of data, and the ability to start to consume and analyze that data with artificial intelligent algorithms are really kind of the future of technology. Okay, and really the adoption of those leading edge elements are critically important.
Thanks, Doug. Let's see if we can't squeeze a couple more questions in because our time is quite short. My shop won't survive another disruption like the coronavirus. What are some steps we should be taking right now to ride out any potential new waves of COVID-19?
John, why don't you go at this one?
I'm sorry, I missed the question there.
The questioner is asking, given the worrying that they won't survive another disruption like coronavirus, they want some steps they should be taking right now to ride out any potential new waves of COVID-19.
Okay, sorry. Well, we all know that there'll be another COVID-19. We don't know what form it will take. It could be a weather event. It could be some geopolitical event. It could be a cyber attack of any kind. So I think really planning for disruption is something that we should all do. We know it's going to happen. It will help minimize the impact of that disruption. It will help you act effectively and efficiently in times of extreme stress, and hopefully return you to a near normal state of operation very, very quickly. As we touched on previously, figure out what the gaps in your process are, whether they relate to relationships, suppliers, perhaps process or systems. Figure out what they are and then actively work to bridge those gaps and fill them in. If system capacity was an issue, or the onboarding of new suppliers was a challenge and it was too painful, too slow, if, let's say, electronic document exchange wasn't as efficient or as inclusive as it should have been, maybe inventory visibility or demand just wasn't where you wanted it to be, then reach out to experts in the field, reach out to your WMS and ERP partners, and look for ways to proactively address those problems before you're in the middle of the next pandemic.
Okay, thank you for that. This questioner says, we were not that far along on our shift to a digital environment when COVID-19 hit. What advice can you give to help us accelerate our transition?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I know Phil has some thoughts on this as well. The biggest thing I would say to accelerate your transition is aligned with what John just said in the previous question. Identify the gaps in your process, identify the gaps in your technical solutions, and find partners that can avail you the opportunity to close those gaps, whether it's systemic processes or systemic configurability, or maybe a gap in the solution for your holistic supply chain, because there's many supply chain technologies available that really can all be integrated and work together, whether it be through a suite vendor such as ourselves, or a group of vendors being worked on with an integrating partner or something of that nature. But to really accelerate the transition, keep it simple. Cut out that extra
and I would
process.
add to what you're saying, Doug. Go at it in phases. We too often we see something and we make it a big project, and while you're at it, you say, why don't we do this and this and this again? Be agile, go in phases, and implement it in small steps so you can adopt it. If you try to do too much, then you may be hit again by a crisis and will be halfway done again to your transformation.
Philip, that's the comment I just made on my notes here. People need to recognize that there may be multiple challenges as a result of COVID-19. And just like Rome wasn't built in a day, we're not going to resolve all of the issues of COVID-19 in one fell swoop. So I would say, prioritizing the issues that you're focusing on the areas of biggest risk or impact, and actually maintaining that focus in the long term will help you keep pushing that transition forward.
Okay, well, that puts us right at the end of our hour. Unfortunately, I really wish we could go on, because this has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. If we didn't get to any audience questions, and I know we did not, I'm sure that our speakers would be only too happy to answer those questions offline. But in the meantime, we've heard so much good information today about how the supply chain can become better prepared to face future waves of the pandemic and any other challenges the future may bring. I want to thank our excellent panelists today for their participation: Philippe Gautrin, Doug Mefford, John Fleming, and I want to thank our audience for participating and listening in as well. Everybody stay well. Have a great day. Thanks so much.